Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another First Friday event sponsored by the Town of Woodside's Arts and Culture Committee. We welcome you. We do have a request that if you have your smartphone with you, that you turn it to the silent mode so that the presentation is not interrupted. Thank you. Now, these programs we do every month, the first Friday of every month. This evening we are quite fortunate to have a local resident who will be speaking on a subject that's near and dear to all of us, food. You know, it's funny, humor is important, and you can laugh, you can enjoy food, and you can go a week without laughing, but not so much without food, so it's important. Virginia Woolf, an author who said that one cannot think well, love well, or sleep well without eating well. And this evening, thanks to our presenter, Erin Gleeson, you'll have an opportunity to learn how perhaps you can do all of those things at once. So without further ado, here's Erin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you to the Arts Council for having me this evening. It's so fun to be here, and it's especially fun to do this talk in front of you who will recognize all these photos in my slideshow. So my name is Erin, and I write vegetarian cookbooks, and I've lived in Woodside for about 12 years now. I moved here from New York for my husband's job. He's a rabbi at Congregation Beth Am in Los Altos. And we have 3 little kids. And I'm going to kind of take you through the steps, the story of how I arrived at creating cookbooks. All right, so this is back in about 2007. I was living in New York City. And I had moved there after undergrad to become a photographer. I didn't know exactly what kind of photography I was going to be interested in, but I interned for a lot of photographers. I worked in a lot of photography studios, and then I went back to school to get my master's in photography. And I took these photos while I was doing my master's, and food just kind of emerged as my thing that I really like to do. It doesn't talk back, and you get to eat it afterwards, so it's really fun. And you don't need a lot of space or equipment to be able to shoot food, so it seemed very accessible for a 20-something me living in New York City with all my photography equipment under my bed and 3 roommates. So this is one of my first projects that I did. I was kind of putting pages from magazines behind food, and for this project, I started out working with just pastries that I found at, little patisseries. And then I approached a really well-known pastry chef, Francois Payard, and asked if I could photograph his delicacies. And I did this series of work when I was in grad school. So I'm definitely interested in things that are very colorful. I love shape and texture and a little bit of gaudiness. I love pattern and a lot of design. These are some of the photographers that I was very influenced by early on. Of course, Irving Penn, who's a famous fashion and still life photographer. He shot for Vogue up until his, I think, 90s. But this is one of my favorite shots, his still life of this watermelon. And then another photographer who's still working today, he's a Magnum photographer, one of the famous photojournalism agencies. And his name is Martin Parr, and he's a street photographer. So while Irving Penn's photos are very set up and constructed still life, Martin Parr was similarly looking at a lot of color and pattern like I love, but all captured just as street photography, sort of captured out in the wild. So I'm always kind of balancing between these 2 types of taking photos, setting something up or just finding it in life. So I started out working kind of as a photojournalist while I was in grad school, taking a lot of different photo assignments for newspapers and magazines. I really got into food when I started volunteering as a photographer at the James Beard Foundation. But these are some of the types of photos that I was taking, sort of in action, kitchen shots, chef shots. Everything's very kind of like fine dining and New York looking. And this was another project that I did, kind of my thesis project when I was in grad school. And it was with a chef called Will Goldfarb, who had a small dessert and wine bar in Soho. And I read an article about him, and I was so fascinated by his idea of creating these very artistic desserts that were kind of built on a dream he had or a trip he had taken, and just really kind of imaginative desserts. And I thought, oh, I'd love to photograph his work. So I ended up doing this whole series where I photographed his dessert, which is the one on the right, and then my interpretation of his idea, reading the recipe, using the ingredients that he used, but I used them in a kind of more artistic way, or a differently artistic way. This is another one from that series. So his dish is on the right, then using the same ingredients, I did my interpretation of it. This was another example of the type of photography that I was doing then. Very kind of minimalistic, harsh light, very kind of modern feeling on black or on white, dark shadows, very graphic feeling. And I think that's kind of what was popular at the time. This is some kind of restaurant work that I was doing for a chef. I think one of them was at the James Beard Foundation. This was in the kitchen at the James Beard Foundation. So if you're not familiar, James Beard was a contemporary of Julia Child, and he was one of the first American chefs in the 50s and 60s to be on television. And he really influenced American cooking, and there's a foundation set up for him in New York, and you can actually go to dinner there. He's no longer alive, but you can go into his old apartment, which is like a brownstone in the West Village, and the dining room is his bedroom, and it's this really unique dining experience. But they have different guest chefs coming through several times a week, and I would go, and they always needed volunteer photographers. You would get to like be a guest at the dinner party. It's usually like 75 people at the dinner, and so I would get to kind of sit at this fun dinner party and take photos, and also get in the kitchen to meet chefs. And so that's how I really kind of boosted my food photography portfolio early on, was meeting all these chefs. I was always trying to choose the famous chefs, but also choose the chefs that were in New York so that I could kind of keep in touch with them. So this was one of my first assignments for a little magazine, and this sort of represents that, photojournalistic style of catching the photo, in the moment. Got those taxis in the background. Natural light. I wasn't bringing any lights, just available light, overhead lights and sunlight, but to try and tell a story. And this was my first assignment for the New York Times, which I was so excited about. I was always sending them my portfolio, and finally they started sending me to restaurants, so that was really fun. This was in 2007, a restaurant in the Village. So right after I finished grad school, I started teaching photography in the BFA department at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. And I taught mostly Photoshop. That's sort of always been my jam, digital photography and the sort of editing side of it. But that was a really fun time. I was kind of shooting a lot of freelance, mostly food gigs that I was always looking for, and then teaching part-time. And I've kind of continued to do that. I've taught at several different colleges, and I currently teach at Stanford in continuing studies. I teach a photography class. So then flash forward to 12 years ago, my husband gets this job out here. I'm from Sonoma County, so California was a draw. But we didn't really know this area, so we just kind of took this whirlwind weekend. We weren't married yet. We didn't have any kids. We were engaged at the time, and we just thought, I don't know, let's try something different. So we're moving from Brooklyn and saw this ad for a little cabin up on Skyline. And we thought, let's just do it for a year. It sounds kind of fun. And we started driving up this crazy road, 84. And I thought, oh my God, there's no way we're going to live here, but the guy's waiting for us, so we better go on up. And then I got there and I was like, oh, how far is this to your office? Because I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I was planning to, try and teach and keep freelancing, but I was really starting over. So I knew I'd be spending probably more time at home. And I was looking for an interesting place to take photos. So when I got out here to this deck facing west off Skyline, I thought, oh my gosh, look at this light. This is a really ideal place to photograph outside because you get that late afternoon golden light. Do any of you live on Skyline on the west side? A couple maybe. So there's a really special light up there. And also the dramatic fog. I now live on Grandview, just down the hill, but there's not the same amount. We're below the fog line. So right above the fog line is really just amazing. It's like a light box in the sky. It's just beautiful. So we took the cabin. And we ended up being there for 10 years until we had a third child and we're busting out of our seams and had to move down the street. But there was this little kind of garage that they weren't using that was kind of like a converted office, and that ended up being my studio. And that's where I didn't know it at the time, but that's where I would end up creating these cookbooks. But anyways, you get a sense of this fog rolling in, creating this perfect environment for photographing outside. This is a photo taken on the deck, kind of like in that golden hour, that kind of like time just before dusk when the shadows are really, really soft. You can see the shadows under the chairs, how they're just really soft. And I think I photographed most of my first 3 books at this time of day. I was always racing the sun, always outside. So I had always shot inside when I lived in New York with studio lighting or flashes, and it was really quite freeing for me to suddenly shoot outside. It's also a little trickier to shoot with natural light because it's not very dependable. You kind of never know when the cloud's going to come or when the sun's going to shift or when it's going to be really golden and then turn to cool. And but I was really, really enjoying just kind of being in nature. And this was like not only a nervy time because I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. We got married about a month into moving, but I was trying to figure out like what my next step would be. And I think I was like a little nervous. I was applying to a lot of different teaching jobs. I was taking my portfolio up to editors in San Francisco, hoping to shoot cookbooks. And just as a way to make a new portfolio, I thought, okay, I'm just going to start a blog. So it was just like me in this little cabin all day, every day while my husband was at work. I was like, what am I going to do with my life? My whole like photography career was left in New York, and what am I doing? So I thought, okay, I'm just getting, like in school, they would say, shoot your way through it. Just like take photos and shoot your way through it. So that's what I did. So I started a Tumblr and started just posting photos of what I was taking. We were getting this farm box, and I started cooking outside a lot and just kind of photographing whatever local produce was coming each week, always looking for the most colorful items in the box. We still get it. It's called Eating with the Seasons. It gets delivered to Los Altos, to my husband's office every Monday. It's a great program if you're looking for a CSA. But I had so much fun experimenting, and I think kind of the hustle bustle of New York, I never really had time to kind of take a pause and be creative or to be playful or to explore. I was just always like kind of, rushing off to the next job. And this was really, I think, looking back, a pivotal time for me creatively, because it really like gave me the space to come up with the next project. And I think I had tried so many projects along the way. I'm sorry this video isn't playing, but it shows me walking down and putting a plate of salad on that mossy log there and taking a photo of it. But it was really important for me to be able to kind of just play around. I got so bored shooting my plates of food on the kitchen table, and so I did, walk it outside one day and just take a photo of it on a mossy log. In fact, this was one of the first photos that I took this way. And if you look way back on my blog, you'll see that it took a few posts to get to this idea. But there was something about just using nature as my backdrop and choosing fresh produce that kind of matched the surroundings. So I really loved like the colors of this acorn squash, the roundness of the squash in comparison to this round log that it was sitting on, the kind of yellow and brown tones that matched the wood behind it. And I just loved how all the colors kind of played off each other. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start doing more of this. What else can I find? But, I'm not one to write a lot. Words don't always come so easily to me. The intros, which are only 2 pages in my cookbooks, are always like the most agonizing part of the whole bookmaking process for me. So I really was hoping to show everything using imagery. Using kind of a diagram. So this is kind of what came naturally to me. Using Photoshop, I took a photo of the ingredients and then overlaid my handwriting, because I couldn't find a font I liked, to just kind of very simply show the steps of how you would make this dish. And mind you that I am certainly a home cook, like an avid home cook, but I did not go to culinary school. I went to art school. So all of the recipes I started making and sharing on this blog were very, very simple, often with 5 ingredients or fewer. Just kind of simple ideas. Sometimes they're just more ideas than actual recipes. So I started putting the images together and just posting this as the photo on Pinterest and on Tumblr and on Instagram. Instagram was very new then. This is like around 2012. But it kind of took off, and people started really responding to this imagery and how immediate it was. You could just like scan the picture and kind of get a sense of whether or not you had the ingredients to make it. And I was having so much fun with it, which I think is kind of what made it successful. I think, when there's something that feels really authentic to you and you put it out there and don't worry about if it's going to be what people want, somehow that authenticity, I think, has a way of playing through and people respond to it in a really positive way. So I just kept making these little diptychs of an image with a kale salad on a mossy log and a picture of the ingredients. And this was the recipe, that's it. I didn't write anything. I said, this is my new favorite kale salad, or something like that. It would be very, very simple. But little by little, people kept asking me about the story, and I was like, what do you mean, what story? I'm just posting some food photography. They'll be, tell me about the story of how did you end up in the woods and stuff. So little by little, the story started to come out. I tried to share a little bit more. That part didn't really come naturally to me. But I was really having fun throughout this process, and I think what made the images look even more unique is the addition of watercolor. And I would add these with Photoshop. So I was doing all these little doodles of fruits and vegetables that were coming in our farm box, and then I started overlaying them onto the layout. So you see the little watermelon watercolor up there. I started to, and that's my handwriting, the kind of watercolor font at the top. That's me painting on paper, scanning it in, and then putting it into the layout digitally. But also thinking about kind of using my background. I studied both photography and sculpture in school, and I think using that kind of idea of sculpture and shapes and how things fit together, and just cutting things differently, kind of using food as my medium. It was really fun. So, instead of chopping up all the watermelon, I made these big slabs and used those as the base of my salad. And it just made a very common salad that you've seen 100 times feel slightly different just because I cut the watermelon differently. This is just having more fun without plates out in nature, using a plate, a leaf as a plate. I have been known to say that I'm obsessed with deviled eggs, so there's deviled eggs in every single book. I just can't get enough of them, and these are some fun ones, very easy. I often make these around Thanksgiving. Apricot bites, again, just thinking about colors and shapes together. These are so simple to make. They're really fun for kids to make, but just a couple ingredients, but a flavor pack little bite. You can make them also with a half of a fresh apricot. And they're really, really cute. So the way I was posting these two images together, these diptychs, they just sort of naturally lent themselves to the book format. So, my blog started to get picked up and it started to get reposted on a lot of other blogs. This is sort of like the beginning or the heyday of blogs and food blogs. And I think I never really set out to be a food blogger. But somehow I was in it and people were sharing it, and before I knew it, a book agent called me and said, I think you should turn your blog into a book. And I thought, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And she was like, yes, you are. I'm going to help you do it. So she's amazing. I still work with her today, and she's kind of just guided me through all of it. So we turned the blog into a book proposal. We spent about 6 months creating a proposal, and then she helped me sell the book. In the end, I chose Abrams as my publisher, and I love them. They do a lot of art books and a lot of cookbooks, but they have just really beautifully printed full color pages. Like every single page in all of my books is color, full color. There's no white pages. Even the text pages are painted with watercolor. So they're really an art book, cookbook blend. And that first book came out in 2014. This is just a little behind the scenes shot of me shooting the cover in the backyard. I have a very, you can tell that it's at that end of the day time when there's not very many shadows. It's probably foggy. That's perfect shooting. There's my view of the cover. So there's the inside of the book, those little watercolor sketches that you'll see on some other things on this table as well. So here's just a couple of recipes from the books, from the first book, sorry. So again, always just thinking about color and shape and how you can cut things to make it kind of look special or look a little bit different, but also like simple enough that really anyone can do this. I did a lot of kind of illustrated pages also to show how to make different things. Instead of just typing out a salad dressing recipe, I made a diagram. I think I'm a very visual thinker, so I'm always trying to think of how you can show everything as a picture. Here's just some other little illustrations of how to cut things. So soon after the first book came out, it became a New York Times bestseller, which was a very exciting call for me to get one Tuesday morning. I think it's on Tuesdays. And they said soon after that, why don't you adapt it for kids? A lot of these recipes are so simple that it would make a really great kids book. So around that time, my first baby was born, Ezra, who's 9 now. Oh. And I invited a bunch of kids from mostly from our synagogue over and asked them to cook with me. And I got some feedback from them. One of which was, I remember one of the little boys, he's in college now, but he said, well, I just don't really know how to cut things. Can you show in the book for kids how to cut things in a very simple and visual way? And I said, yes, I will do that. So I made this page for him. But I tried to, a lot of what I do is inspired by color. And I thought it would be really fun to have a color party in the book where there's like a little menu that you could have for a kid's party, and each recipe is inspired by a different color. But again, it's all vegetarian and pretty veggie-licious. And of course there's sweets, the kids love the drinks in the book. They loved making the drinks. And they loved making the sweets, of course. So then my next book, it felt like a natural next step to do an entertaining book. So we made the Forest Feast Gatherings, which came out in 2016. And this book is laid out in menus. So the first book is laid out by kind of type of food. It's like appetizers, drinks, salads, main dishes, desserts, like that. And this one is like a summer dinner party, a holiday party, a cocktail party, a weeknight dinner, but lots of different kind of occasions. I feel like I'm always looking to cookbooks when people are coming over. What do I make? I don't know what to do for, something that's seasonal in the fall or whatever. So this is just that. It's like if you're having people over in the fall, you might flip to the fall dinner party, and you can see there's I think 5 or 6 suggestions, and I give little tips like if you don't have much time, like buy this and just make this one and this one, or ask somebody to bring this one. But everything's pretty simple, and it's like a doable amount of items that you could make, like the day of, or maybe shopping the day before. So this is really fun, and I did some kind of DIY type ideas of like how to set a table, which I still have to look back at my book's diagram to remember what side the fork goes on. Like I don't do anything too fancy. Everything's very casual. But, sort of ideas on how to do the flowers and how to make a centerpiece that's fun and unique, and different types of occasions that you could add. This was at our old house, and we would often do like a movie night where we put like a projector outside and watch a movie on the deck. And then I had like a special popcorn recipe that went with that. But here's like a brunch menu. This is one of the DIYs, making this little garland for a holiday cocktail party. And then I feel like with each book I've kind of evolved artistically in the way I lay out the pages. So I really get to do everything in my books. I come up with all the recipes. Each book has 100 recipes, except for the kids' book, it has 40. But I come up with all the recipes, and I photograph and style everything. I shop for all the props. I paint all the backdrops. I lay out all the pages. So I get to do absolutely every part of the book, which is really fun and unusual. I think when we were trying to pitch the book, a lot of publishers were like, you want to do what? It's like, usually that's like several different people, a whole team would work on that together. But I really like to do all the parts, and Abrams was willing to let me do that. So I started experimenting with different types of like text, and and imagery layouts and how to combine the words on certain pages. So this could have just been, a typed introduction on white pages, but not for me. I was like, I want to paint the pages and I'm going to lay some flowers on top, and then I overlaid the kind of text on top of it. And of course painted all the things. So I got to do some little paintings for some of the blank pages in the book too, like this little cabin. And of course I'm always foraging for items out in the woods to use in my layouts. But if you can imagine, that's just like a piece of paper that I painted on the right here. And then I once it dried, I laid it down on the table and I gathered some moss and leaves and put it on the edges, and I took a photo of it. And then I put that into the book layout. And then I painted contents on a piece of paper and overlaid that in Photoshop. And then I added the handwriting, which is each of the kind of more bold text, in Photoshop in a different layer, and then typed in the rest. And I create all the pages in Photoshop, and then the designer at Abrams puts everything into InDesign, which is what it's printed from, all Adobe. We had a friend with a drone come over one day and do an aerial shot of where the cabin is, which is kind of fun. So that's like Pescadero is sort of like behind the drone, and it's looking towards Skyline, if you can imagine that. Here's just a couple of recipes from the Gatherings book. Again, lots of vegetables, very produce forward, very simple. A lot of times my seasoning is just olive oil, salt, and pepper. I think there's so much flavor you can add to really good in-season vegetables with just those three things. Here's a flower arrangement idea. And then it came to my next book. And my publisher said, what would you like to do next? And I said, well, my husband has a 3-month sabbatical. At that point, we had a 3-year-old and a baby, and we wanted to travel. So I pitched it to my publisher to do kind of like a travel book. We decided to hit up the Western Mediterranean. And anyways, they were up for it. I did a proposal and they said yes. So we spent 3 months going around Spain, Portugal, Italy, and France. And I just took a ton of photos along the way and a ton of notes on everything we ate. And then I came home and did vegetarian adaptations of everything we ate. And sometimes it was just recipes inspired by things that we saw growing. This was in France. Ezra and Max, they were 3.5 and like 9 months when we left. We spent the first month in Barcelona. This was a day trip to Girona, Spain. This was in France, Antibes. This is in Portugal. I was obsessed with all the pottery. By the way, I got almost all of my plates for all the books at the Woodside Village rummage sale that I have not seen lately. Is that still going? Because I need to go back and get more plates. But so much of my kind of collecting inspiration came from pottery I saw in Portugal, and the tile. I loved it. So much amazing produce, very similar to California produce, all along that western part of the Mediterranean. This is from our apartment in Portugal, in the south, Praia da Luz. This was visiting an olive oil grove in Portugal, an olive oil tasting, amazing olive oil. This was in Cinque Terre. We got to visit a very small family vineyard and try their wines with the best view ever. So these are just a few shots from the Mediterranean book. And some of the recipes, like I said, are just ideas. Like everywhere you go in Portugal, when you start out a meal at a restaurant, you're given a bowl of olives. And I was so surprised to see that the olives are really just a little different everywhere you went. Kind of the type of olive, the way they were marinated, what was put on them. So I came home and made my own version using some orange zest and garlic and thyme to kind of recreate that really flavorful olive experience before a meal. But again, it's not even a recipe, it's just an idea. Sprinkle these few things. This spread was inspired by the Pinchos bars in the neighborhood that we stayed in Barcelona. You go in and there's a whole kind of counter full of little rows. Has anyone ever been to a Pinchos bar? It's so fun. It's just such a fun way to eat and kind of social. It's like you're going to a bar for a drink, maybe sangria. But there's all these little toasts like this, all in the window, kind of like on these shelves. And each one has a different color toothpick. And you just take whatever you want, and you put it all on your plate, and then you go back to your little bar table, and you eat, and at the end of the evening, or whenever you're ready to go, you just take your toothpicks up to the front and pay. It's so fun. But they were just like these really fun, flavorful little bites. I just thought that was such a fun way to eat and socialize. So these are a couple more shots from our time in Barcelona, or near Barcelona. We also went to Sicily, which was really fun. I think we had patatas bravas like almost daily, because it's not always easy to find vegetarian food when you're traveling. So patatas bravas, I love them. Pan con tomate was also another common one, where you take the bread and you take a halved tomato and you rub it on. And some people use garlic, and some people don't, and some people use manchego cheese on top, and some people don't, and everybody had this very specific way. Anyways, a friend who grew up in Barcelona told me how her family makes it, and this is how I did it. I put this photo on Instagram, and people went crazy, being like, you don't put garlic. And other people like, you don't put, manchego. Like, you're doing it all. Everybody had a different way of doing it. So, and also whether or not the title should be pan con tomate in Spanish, or the Catalan title, or, each region had their own way of making this. But I love that connection to food, and to memory, and to family, and how each family has their own very specific way of making a traditional dish. Because I feel like I don't have that as much growing up in California. Maybe a couple things at Thanksgiving, but my mom has some funny things she makes at like St. Patrick's Day. She has a very funny dessert that she always makes. But, these are not kind of things that everyone makes and has their own version of. So I was really interested in that kind of legacy of recipes that I found traveling in Europe. I loved working in some of the the very important historic places around all the locations that we were visiting. This is Casa Batillo by Gaudi. It was also difficult to get permission to use all of those, but I got it. I photographed a lot of tile while we were traveling in Portugal, and then printed them poster size to use as backdrops later. So I photographed pretty much all the food back home. This was a restaurant in Nice. Again, always looking for color and how I can really boost color using fruits and vegetables. This is a mixture of Sicily, Taormina, and Barcelona in Portugal. I just love the simplicity of that. Was a dessert that we were served at a restaurant in Sicily. Just a persimmon, just a very nice ripe persimmon. It was delicious. This was one of the recipes. I have a shortbread recipe in every book, and this is one of the recipes that I tried to kind of just draw on some of the things that we saw growing. So in Sicily, near Mount Etna, there was a lot of pistachios grown, and also a lot of honey produced. Even at the top of the volcano, they had a whole honey tasting, like a table twice as big as this, full of different varieties of honey and little spoons, and you could taste all the different honey. It's like, that's amazing, that's Sicily. Try some honey. So I made these honey pistachio bars kind of inspired by that place. And I tried to tell the little stories of each recipe too as I went. So that brings us to our most recent book, The Forest Feast Road Trip. This came out last year, and it chronicles a long road trip that my family and I took around California. So this is, can you guys tell what this cover shot is? It's Lake Tahoe. Yeah, isn't that nice? So we traveled more than 2,500 miles, I think, without leaving the state in one big 3-week swoop. And then we went back and did several other kind of like long weekend or week-long side trips over the course of about 2 years. And we had a third child in the middle of that, and a pandemic. But we kept driving. This is out in Half Moon Bay. So these are the points around California that we stopped, or that I featured in the book. And of course I had fun doing all the watercolor. So the unique thing about this book, the other books, the first couple really focus on the recipes and, well, they all focus on the recipes, but there's kind of like the story of moving to the woods, and then there's the entertaining piece and the kids piece and the travel piece of the Mediterranean. And this one was the first time I kind of featured the places that we stayed. So we stayed in 10 really unique homes and dwellings around California, and I painted each of them here, and then there's photographs of each place that we stayed throughout. So it has a little bit of a travel log feel to it. This is one of them. I tried to stay in as many cabins as we could, taking that idea of cooking from a cabin in the woods, kind of taking that idea on the road. This was in Big Sur, and we stayed here for a couple nights and kind of explored that whole area. Most of the places that we stayed in were vacation rental homes, but this is my aunt and uncle's house in Santa Barbara that we go to every year for Thanksgiving. So I had to kind of include this spot. It's a very cool mid-century house that I have been going to for so many years, and it's a great spot. It's my favorite spot ever, actually. This was a fun place, an urban farm in downtown LA that we stayed that had a beautiful yurt and an outdoor bathtub and goats and a pig. This was near Tamales Bay, and I wanted to show this photo because I think the nice part about travel is that it can really connect you to your food and where it's come from. And I think going to Tamales and Point Reyes, which I'm sure many of you have done, you see these fields of green full of cows, and you think, oh my gosh, no wonder the cheese is so good that comes from here, right? And it's just that little connection. Now when I'm at Safeway buying cheese, I think, oh, I'm going to buy the one from Tamales because I can remember those cows eating that beautiful green grass. And it just makes you kind of taste and remember things in a different way, and I think that's just one of the best things about travel and food. Also in this book, we visit a lot of farms and ranches and wineries and different food producers throughout California, and I photographed them as we went and tried to learn a little bit about different regions. It's so different. So these strawberries were picked out in Pescadero with some women that we know who run Fly Girl Farm, and we went and picked strawberries with them. Here's a couple more. This is Tahoe. But then by chance we ended up, when we were driving through the Eastern Sierra, we didn't have a place to stay for one night, and I thought we were just going to stay on a roadside motel. And the night before, my husband was just on Google Maps, looking at the road that we were about to drive, and it's 395, and he said, oh, on the map it shows a little ranch here, let's see what they have and maybe we can stop there. And he tapped on it, and they had a website, and they also had cabins for rent. So we just called up and we're like, do you have a cabin for tonight or tomorrow night, whatever it was? They were like, yeah, come on down. And it was $150 or something, very affordable. It was amazing. It was one of the most unique places we stayed. The woman who owns it actually grew up in Woodside, and she's been there for many years. But she was amazing. She had this tractor, and she would bulldoze these huge rocks and clear garden beds. And she let us gather eggs from her chicken coop, and we picked plums from her tree and lavender from her field and heard her story. And it just had this, the land itself had this really magical history and feeling also about it, because the Native American people used to live in this part because there was water there. There's a stream going right through it. So she told us some stories about that. And we also went to a local museum that talked about some of the culinary practices of the Native American people in this area, and they saved seeds for certain things that were traditionally grown in that area. But it's so dry, so it's interesting to see her farming practices in the Eastern Sierra versus Pescadero versus, down south in the desert. We went to a date farm and talked to the farmers there about how they grow and harvest dates. So it's all these amazing different microclimates within California. You can get everything. You can get bananas at the farmer's market down south. It's amazing. So there's one shot, I think. Does anybody recognize that one right there? I put this one in there for you. This is right down Skyline from my house, and I like to go hiking there. Anyways, it's Windy Hill, the top of Windy Hill right there. So I tried to just kind of weave in different things. There's some wild mint that grows in that part of Skyline, so I used this inspiration for a mint recipe. Here's just a couple extra travel photos. I wanted to show you the one with the poppies there in the middle. That's Fogarty. So we tried to feature as many kind of local to California different makers and producers as possible. And of course went to more farmers markets than you can ever imagine. My husband was like, we don't ever need to go to a farmer's market again by the end of this trip. It was fun. So that kind of takes me to the end of the 5 books that I've made. And the past year has been a focus on creating some products. So for a long time I've wanted to use my watercolors and my photography, and I make these kind of collages. And I've long wanted to make textiles and clothing and different products for the home. So I finally had time this year to do that, and I've made several different items. They're all on my online shop, and I brought a couple here tonight. And I have a bunch of a whole holiday collection that's launching in 2 weeks. So if you sign up for my newsletter, you can get a little email about that. But I'll show you just a couple of the things I've done. So this is some of the little doodles. I have them available as framed artwork, framed prints on my site. My publisher has also made a whole line of stationery. It's from a couple years ago, so it's still on Amazon. It was in Paper Source, but I think it's no longer. But these are some of the stationery items. Made these paper placemats that were really fun. I think they're almost sold out. You can get them on eBay, I think. Here's one of the prints. So that's a protea that is in the road trip book on the cover. And then I've done a couple fun product collaborations in the last year also. This was timed to release at the same time as my California road trip cookbook, but it's a small olive oil producer that's women-led in San Francisco, and it's called Primary, and they make finishing oil. And it's like really flavorful, good, local olive oil that you drizzle on something after you cook it. So you don't really cook with it. It's more like put on a salad or on some roasted vegetables kind of thing. But I got to do this olive oil collaboration with them. And everything's picked in Northern California. It's all very local. But I got to paint the label, which was really fun. And I put the poppies from the cover of the book on the olive oil label. I also did a recent collaboration with a small winemaker in Portola Valley called Sonder and Hem. Has anyone tried their wine before? It's really great. Yeah, it's a small family wine producer, and the grapes come from the Santa Cruz Mountains. And I painted their label for the most recent Sauvignon Blanc. It's really good, and it's on their website. I have a link to it from my website, but it's a really beautiful bottle. And then these are my cheese boards. I also did a collage using a lot of flowers and some of the artwork from the books to make these cheese boards. I have a few of them up here. They're kind of like a thick, it's not melamine, but it's sort of similar texture to that, or it's heavier, but it's a cutting board or a serving board. And then coming soon, I have aprons, which I'm really excited about. Those are going to be in my holiday collection, and I have some tea towels that I have a couple of them up here on the table, but those are all coming soon. And this has sort of been my inspiration photo. I took this photo in Sacramento at the Capitol. Have you ever been there? They have these massive orange trees right next to the Capitol building. They're really big and really old, but I carried my camera in my car for like a year, the first year that we lived here, because I really wanted I was blown away by all the citrus, because coming from New York City, and there must have been some citrus like growing up in Sonoma County, but I don't remember it as much as like Palo Alto area. These citrus trees are amazing. So I kept imagining this upholstered, like printed on fabric and upholstered for this little couch settee I had. And I finally found this tree where the oranges were big enough and dense enough to get one photo. So this has become kind of we call it the family tartan. At this point, we all have clothes in it. The kids have clothes. My husband has a hoodie. I have tablecloths, have a couch, have all kinds of stuff. Just keeps going. I have aprons. Aprons are coming. So I've been having fun with that. So there's one of the outfits that I created, leggings and hoodie. So those are on my site. I think I'm hilarious, but it's fun. It's like people see us coming now. Like I had somebody, my husband keeps wearing his hoodie, and somebody at soccer practice came up to me the other day, and they're like, "Oh, you're the orange family." Yeah, I guess we're the orange family. Anyways, so I'm really into printing my artwork on fabric. I just love it. I keep trying it on all different kinds of fabric. After many, many samples over the last year, I finally found the right heavyweight flax linen that's washable. So I have this line of tablecloths just in this one design that you see on the table up here. But those tablecloths, I have some of them here tonight, but they're also on my site, but they're really great fabric. And then this is my newest dress, my newest Forest Feast dress. I'm wearing it tonight, but this is a collage that I made of a bunch of flowers that I picked around here. There's some eucalyptus, there's some acacia, there's some lemons, there's bay, there's camellia. A lot of it came from the woods near where I live. And I created in Photoshop this black floral pattern, and then I have had it printed on fabric. So these dresses are also coming in a couple weeks in my holiday collection, so I'm so excited. I had a little reunion, a college reunion last spring in Austin, Texas, and my girlfriends, there's 8 of us, and a whole bunch of them all bought these on my site and showed up from there. They started texting from their different planes coming in from like New York and Portland and everything, and everybody had their orange outfits on. It's pretty funny. Anyways, I get a kick out of it. This is just a couple last photos. This is another outfit that I made using a Photoshop collage. But anyways, I think just to kind of wrap it up, my goal with the Forest Feast is to get everyone cooking, but also to get everyone hosting. I think there's something really special about inviting people into our homes. I think so much more understanding happens that way. It's a way for people to kind of get to know you in a different way than if you were to meet at a restaurant or in the park. So I try to make that really accessible with super simple ideas. And yeah, I want to inspire people to have dinner parties and cook more with vegetables. And that's my goal. Yeah, so there we go. Thank you so much for having me. I'll be up here at the front signing books. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you spending your Friday evening with me.